posted, of course, by Friday on YouTube. But I can tell you right now that this week, well, we're doing two topics, if you've been looking at the syllabus. The first one today is Art Nouveau, includes one of my favorite artists, one that my father used to consider the greatest artist of the 19th century, these European artists, Toulouse-Lautrec. I'm sure you've all heard of him, and you may have even seen some of the one really good and then a couple of not so good movies, Hollywood movies about him and his life. But in any case, that's today's topic. We'll focus on Art Nouveau. But on Wednesday, the early modern architecture unit is really important. I'm going to go ahead and give you a bit more information than I would normally do. That is at least two of the slides. One from today, very likely, and one of the slides from today. I will always, as I always do, tell you which ones are the most important ones. But then on Wednesday, at least two of the slides that you're going to see on Wednesday will almost certainly appear on the final exam. The final is the same format as as the first midterm. I've been working, by the way, grading my way through the midterms. And mostly they're pretty good grades. The biggest mistake a few people have made is not even doing 1.5 pages on either the meaning or the formal analysis. And what can I say? If you had until midnight to turn that in, you had an advantage over my in-person class. But the same thing happens with some of those papers as well. Anyway, the point I think I can guarantee, barring an unforeseen complication, I should be able to get the grades back to you by Wednesday, so you'll be able to see them in your inbox before you log in, by Wednesday morning, before you log in to the class at 3 online, of course. Now, the walking tour was fabulous yesterday. We had 20 people. It's a good turnout. The only strange thing that happened, really, was that I had like 3 or was it 4 people, 3 email me and 1 voicemail me saying they were standing outside the building. All you had to do is, it says welcome. There's a buzzer. If you'd gotten into the building, you could have joined us. But here's what I'm thinking, just as a quick thing, and we need to get started with the Art Nouveau slides. But just as a possible fallback or, alternative, for those who want to come on the tour, because A, they're interested enough in architecture to want to see places they wouldn't otherwise see or know or learn about. And the other is for the 20 points extra credit. I'm willing to do a somewhat, I should say, a varied version of that tour. I cannot get us in all the same buildings. That takes hours and hours of planning. But I can get us into at least one of the historic buildings we saw Sunday and walk through places where, like I said, Napoleon, the devil, and nude Greek classical figures are all visible. You'll see what I mean. If you want to do that, I need at least 6 people to make it worthwhile. The fee would be the same. I mean, it's a lot of work for a very modest amount, but for the amount of time I'm willing to contribute that, it would need to be on a Sunday. And I don't know if Sunday the 28th, is it, the last Sunday in November, works for people. It's getting kind of dicey with weather too. So I'm thinking that it's just a matter of, I'm going to send an email. That's what I'll do. And all my students in both classes, a couple from each class, missed the tour. If they can find, 1 or 2 friends, and then the total is at least 6 or more, I will do that second tour, which won't be as detailed and inclusive of the interiors, but it will at least include one historic interior and all the exteriors that we saw on Sunday, and it'll be worth 20 points. I'll send an email and I'll just decide by this Friday if there's enough interest whether or not to go ahead with that. Okay, let's get started with Art Nouveau and let's do the definition. And I'm going to go ahead and do the screen share here. And it's making sure you guys can see this, right? This isn't a must know, but we're working our way up to the first must know. So you see from the list of terms, of course, that for today, we only have one definition, and that is the 3 main features of Art Nouveau. Okay, they're not that complicated or long, but they're 3 distinct elements or stylistic details that you'll see in any Art Nouveau style painting. That's what we're going to see today. The first one is a whiplash curve, just like it sounds, two words, whiplash curve. So I'll go ahead and say this is not a must-know. You don't have to take notes on this. I just listen. This is by Van Gogh. It's a painting of the wife of the postman, one of his few friends. He didn't have many friends. The local postman in the town he lived in, southern France, his whole family befriended Van Gogh, and that was one of his few happy moments that he spent. The rest of the town hounded and harassed and bullied him. But this postman understood the genius he had. So that's the portrait of his wife. And it's whatever her name was, Roulet or something. You don't need to know the name. But she's sitting, holding the handle to a baby stroller. And that's a whiplash curve. So is the outside of her body as the areas I'm tracing now with this cursor of the outer edges of the thick, bold outlines form whiplash curves. And if that's not enough, there are whiplash curves in the vines on the wallpaper pattern behind her. So again, the first feature of Art Nouveau, you should be writing this in the definition. You do need to write, of course, each definition, which could appear, of course, on the final. The first feature of Art Nouveau of the three main features is whiplash curves. Usually more than one. You see a bunch here. Second thing is broad areas of flat color. Well, boy, this does that very, very obviously. Look at the red here. It's kind of a flat, dull red, and the green on her blouse. So broad areas of flat colors are a second feature of all Art Nouveau art. And this Art Nouveau is not only for paintings, that's what we're going to focus on, but Art Nouveau also influenced architecture. And the most famous example of that is the Eiffel Tower, which we'll probably end with. Okay, then the third feature is geometric patterns of flowers, vines, and plant motifs. Again, geometric patterns of flowers, vines, and what was the third thing I said? Yeah, vines, flowers, and well, trees. I should have said trees because trees could be included.
Plant motifs.
Sorry. Yes, plant motifs. Thank you. I'll say it again. The third feature, sorry, thank you, is geometric patterns of various, I should put it this way, so I apologize, of various plant motifs, comma, including flowers, vines, trees, etc. Again, geometric patterns of various plant motifs, comma, including vines, flowers, trees, etc. You'll see what I mean. Right here, it should be obvious. There's two of those three things right in this background. I don't even know if that's real wallpaper. I think it's Van Gogh's imagination. It's very fertile imagination creating these floating flower patterns in a geometry. Obviously, look, they repeat here, of course, and the vines form obvious geometric patterns. These are probably olives. That's what they look like to me, green olives, which grow in southern France. You would have seen them growing out in the countryside. So those are all plant motifs, obviously, geometric patterns of plant motifs, which include flowers, vines, trees, etc. Okay, everybody, you have that definition now. So let's move on to another painting that is by Gauguin. We already talked about him and his version of post-impressionism, what he called synthetism. You already have the notes on that, so I'm not repeating that. But this is an example of Art Nouveau influence on him, even though he invented his own style of painting, again, coined the term synthetism and all that, and people imitated him. He was influenced by the Art Nouveau movement, and that movement started in France in the 1880s, which is right when he and Van Gogh and the artists we covered last week, the post-impressionists, were having their biggest success. Well, Van Gogh didn't have success, but produced their best work. And this is an example from the 1880s through the 1920s. Art Nouveau lasted all the way into the early 20th century. And this is whiplash curves here on her blanket, on the outlines of her body, and even the palm tree leaves. Or is it called fronds? I guess they're called fronds. They're not branches, right? Off the palm trees all form whiplash curves if you follow the outer edges of them. Broad areas of flat color, that's pretty obvious. The red here, the green, the black of almost dark purple into black of the blanket. And then obviously the geometric motifs of geometric plant motifs are here in the blossoms sitting behind her and the palm trees. Okay, now let's get to our first must know. I love this one. It's called Three Puppies. You never think of Gauguin as that sentimental. He rarely showed any sentiment in his life, his relationships or his art. But here, I guess he had some reason why these three little puppies appealed to him. And that's so obviously Art Nouveau. Look at all the whiplash curves, the goblets form them, the dogs' bodies, including their tails, and the flat areas of black, right, colors, and then the plant motifs. Okay, so let's go to our first must know. Now, this one is sort of on the cusp. It's an example of Art Nouveau in two of the three features that we just used. But there's no other way to categorize this as anything other than an Art Nouveau inspired piece by a unique artist. You've all seen this. I'm sure you've all seen this. It's so famous. It's our first must know. The Scream, just two words, the title, The Scream. The artist's name is Munch, not Munch. It's not the thing you do when you're hungry. It's a Germanic sounding last name, though. He was from Norway. But it's spelled M-U-N-C-H. So that is the same spelling as the other word, some people think, but you pronounce it Munch. And the date is 1893. So what makes this an Art Nouveau, or most, you could say largely or primarily, that's probably the best word to use, primarily an Art Nouveau style painting? Well, two of the three features should just jump out at you. There's nothing in this painting that doesn't have whiplash curves except the railings on the pier and this mysterious ghost-like couple in the background. The screamer, obviously, is the subject. It's a self-portrait, if that's, we'll get to the meaning in a few minutes. But I just want to do now, because part of the meaning, remember, is actually, so this is under, in your notes, should be under the heading of meaning. Remember, always, the style of work of art is part of its meaning. And of course, how do you know what style it is? Well, that's what we're going to do now. Is it should be obvious. The whiplash curves are his head, his hands, his entire body, the shoreline here, right? And that looks like a cloud or fog or something. We don't even know what that is. But here's the actual shoreline, and then the clouds in the sky, and even the horizon here, the objects in the distance, the way the sky comes down to them, and then he paints this curve here, this obvious whiplash curve. So that's the first of the two things in this painting, the Scream, that mark it as primarily an Art Nouveau painting. The other, the broad areas of flat color, well, that's in the sky here. The oranges and the yellows up above. Okay, now the only thing it doesn't have, because there weren't any plants on a pier at the edge of the shoreline that well, there could have been, but he chose not to paint them. So it doesn't have the geometric patterns of plant motifs. It doesn't have that, but otherwise it would qualify as Art Nouveau since it has two of those three features. But there is another aspect to the style of it, and that's X with a capital E, expressionist. It's an Art Nouveau painting, which is an early expressionist painting. So, a lot of artists you can't categorize. You can't just put them in a single category. We've seen that now. So Munch was one of those artists who transcended two types or two styles of painting, Art Nouveau and expressionism. We're going to deal with expressionism next week. I'm not giving you the definition now, the full definition. It's a fairly complex concept, but it has, again, just a few features. We'll keep as simple as possible, but that's for next week. So what can you say about it's with like the word to express yourself, the capital E? What makes this an expressionist painting? The only fact now for your notes you need to write is it's an intense display of the artist's emotion, which is one of the main features. In fact, some say the main feature of expressionist painting. But the idea of that as a style, a movement, a trend didn't hit until after 1900. You see, in other words, here, Munch was ahead of his time by decades, or well, more than a decade. He was already expressing his inner, and here's the rest of the meaning. Some of you already know this, but there are a lot of false facts put out there about this painting. I had some students, and I understand why, because they went to a website that pretended they knew what it meant. Oh, this is after Krakatoa, the famous volcanic explosion in the Pacific that did send volcanic dust into the sky all around the globe. That's true, but it was not, that happened in the 1880s. It's not about that. Here's what the actual scene depicts. It's a self-portrait. He wrote a letter about that, so we don't have to guess. That's him on the pier with his, ghost-like, or some think alien, right? Looks like his head looks like an alien. Some people think aliens look like that. Who knows? Anyway, you could just say his strangely non-human looking figure. It's him remembering a panic attack is a short way to write it, or you can say being overwhelmed with anxiety. I think panic attack is a phrase most people are familiar with, so that's probably the easiest phrase to use, that he was having a panic attack, or one moment, somehow, suddenly, out of the blue, he was overwhelmed with anxiety. And he had to let out a scream to relieve his anxiety, which is what he was doing. This actually happened to him. And the people behind him, some think, are friends of his who were taking a walk with him, when he had this panic attack, he walked ahead of them so as not to alarm them. That's one theory. We don't know. The two people behind him are not clearly identified. They could be just strangers happening to walk on the pier at that time, or they could be friends of his. In any case, what we know for sure is that the figure that everyone notices, it was on the a poster of this painting was on the wall of a half a dozen dorm rooms when I went to Berkeley decades ago. So it's even more popular now. That figure is a self-portrait of the artist Munch himself, who, by the way, why did he have a panic attack? Because his family had a very unfortunate record with early deaths. His mother, two of his sisters, I think his wife, certainly his father, and so his parents, two of his siblings, and several of his closest friends died young, died early and painfully, from infections or diseases that were, not, peaceful deaths. They were painful deaths. So he had experienced death close up and personal, and he was in his early 20s when this incident happened, and he's remembering it a few or several years later. Okay, so he's walking on a pier, and suddenly he can't suppress his inner angst or anxiety or fear. It became overwhelming, and he had to scream to let it out. So the scream seems like it's actually reverberating on the shoreline, in the water, even to some degree, and then definitely in the sky. So that makes it a sort of a early example of an expressionist kind of painting, but the stylistic details are primarily art developed. Okay, so that's the whole meaning. Well, the formal analysis is there. I don't think there's a strict.
Mark?
Yes, please.
I think someone's stuck in the waiting room.
Oh, I haven't. Now that's strange. It usually announces that to me. Yeah. I don't see that, but yeah. Thank you, though. Yeah. Well, that just says mute also. I'm not sure what that. Is there still, because I don't see what.
Someone in the Discord was saying they were still waiting to be let in, so maybe.
Yeah, no, thanks. So I'm not sure then what to do, because when I hit this, it should bring their name up, shouldn't it? That's what it usually does. And all it does is participants waiting room 1. Okay. Oh, there we go. Now it's showing up. Thank you. Hi, welcome, Moon. Yes, you're in now. I guess I didn't notice that, and one of your fellow students was good enough to point that out. So we're just still on the first slide. I already gave the meaning. Of course, you'll see that when we post it, or I post this on by Friday at 8 p.m. The first slide we're on is The Scream by Munch, M-U-N-C-H, 1893. So let's do our formal analysis. Well, I was just starting to say it's not, there's hardly anything stable. You could make the case that the railing is dynamic too because of the diagonal, but you could say the upright posts and maybe the couple, I guess, because they're very faint. But that's very minor. It's not even 10% of the painting. This is over 90% dynamic is how I'd write it. The entire sky, the shoreline, the horizon, him, the screamer, the artist's self-portrait of himself, all of those things are dynamic, of course. and even the pier itself at a diagonal. There is some bold outline around his figure, around the edges of his clothing at least, and I would say his hands too, but not his head. Other than that, there's not really bold outlines on the pier, and nothing in the background has outlines. So there's minimal line used, mostly on his body, and that's pretty much bold. The largest mass, well, it's almost equal. You got the pier, the shoreline, and the sky, and there's no accident that they are almost equal areas of roughly a third each. If you count this whole area with the water and the shoreline itself, it's pretty equally divided in about thirds, and that's another way of balancing. He's in the middle. The pier and the sky pretty much balance each other out. I just their same areas roughly covered by the pier and the sky, so it's balanced roughly top to bottom and left to right. Some people think because there's couples here it weighs it to the left, but I don't see that because there's enough right of the shoreline here that pretty much equally weighs it to the right. Okay, and then we have for space, he probably used, it definitely has obviously overlapping and foreshortening on the pier. Diminishing size on the humans. I don't think he used scientific perspective here. Some people think he did, but there's no evidence for that. And he didn't. He did that on some things, but in this one is probably doesn't have scientific perspective. But what we do see some people, I mean, see is they think this is atmospheric perspective, but then what are these objects? These look like just rocks along the beach to me. So is that, you could say maybe. To me, it looks like part of the overall color scheme, but perhaps that one area has atmospheric perspective. And then we have the rhythm is obvious with the pier post of the pier or railing on it. And of course, the whiplash curves everywhere. And his body, his two hands, his two arms. And then we have no simulated texture, none, and minimal modeling. The only modeling I see is on the railing and a very little bit or somewhat very faint, you could say, or again, diffused is a good word, diffused modeling, perhaps on his clothing, perhaps. But it's really more bold outline. But that the pier definitely does. The railing, I mean, on the pier has some modeling. Everything else is soft and diffused with no modeling anywhere beyond, I mean, the pier, and no simulated texture. And for proportion, I don't think, or scale, there's, no altered or distorted scale or proportion. Okay. Now we're going to get to an artist who was so controversial, he was banned in his own hometown and country for a while, but people still bought his painting. So it became even more famous after he was banned by the government. Well, not the government, but the local city council in Vienna, Italy. Vienna, Austria, I apologize. The capital of Austria, Vienna. All right, so our next must know is Klimt. I'm going past this and going back to it because whoops, whoa, that jumped. Klimt, the kiss. Well, now I know it's in here, so we'll have to go ahead. There it is. That was a Klimt painting. I've added it because I've said for the whole semester now, I don't want to just show exactly the same slides every semester over and over, year after year. That gets stale and would make me less, focused on interesting angles and aspects. But this is a must know that I've always had, and it's in almost every art history textbook. It's a world famous painting. I think many of you have seen it. Again, the title, The Kiss, 2 words, Klimt, Klimt, 1908. So what are we looking at here? Well, it should be obvious that it is an Art Nouveau painting. It screams Art Nouveau. He loved that style, and Vienna was one of the centers of the Art Nouveau movement. Though it began in Paris, Vienna and other cities in Eastern Europe embraced the Art Nouveau in their architecture and their painting. And you'll see examples of the influence of Art Nouveau in architecture at the end of today's lecture. So when it comes to painting, we've already given those 3 elements. The whiplash curves are just everywhere around their outer, edges of their body. Her robe, curls back over on it. That's a whiplash curve right there. Even her feet right? The angles of the outer edges of things. In this case, there's no plants that make a whiplash curve like that Van Gogh painting we started with, but there's plenty of whiplash curves here. And of course, the geometric patterns of plant motifs are on the grass. They're kneeling on the grass here as they kiss, of course. And then there are pure geometric patterns. That's his signature motif that marks him as different from any other Art Nouveau painter. He also incorporated purely geometric shapes, and he loved squares and rectangles, particularly different dark colors of squares and rectangles. So the man's robe, or is it a blanket he has over him, has that kind of pattern, whereas the woman's patterns do have flower motifs repeated on her robes, I guess it is, or is it his robe, the inside of his robe? That's what some people think, and this would be the edge of her dress, so more on her dress, I should say it that way. There we go. You see them there on her sleeve, and all up and down, even down to the knee area. So again, geometric patterns of plant motifs are present here. And broad areas of flat color would be mostly at the top, although that qualifies too. The signature, remember that phrase, I told you it'd be useful. You don't have to use it to get an A on the final, but it's useful when you're writing, essay questions on the final exam. And I'll tell you now, I'm not cutting this slide or the screen. Neither of those slides will get cut. The last one we just saw, this one, they're very important, and they have at least a high possibility, I won't say probability, of being on the final. So there's broad areas of flat color, obviously. In that case, it's black, right? But he used other colors too on his geometric patterns. And then somewhat around there in their hair, the area of both their hairs shown as broad area of dark black colors around their faces. So what we have is an Art Nouveau style painting by an artist who broke a lot of rules, even though he was following the basic features of Art Nouveau. He also was pushing the boundaries of moral, let's say moral behavior isn't the right, well, yeah, in his personal life, but that's not what we're focused on. The themes of his paintings were scandalous to many people. This one, not so much. There's no nudity in this painting. I will show you one that did have some, and it was banned all over the Midwest in this country when an exhibit of his paintings was displayed in the 50s, long after he died in the 1950s. He lived in the late 1800s and early 1900s in Vienna. He was the most famous Art Nouveau painter. That's a fact about him. I'll repeat that. That's pretty important if this is on the essay part of the final. He was the most famous Art Nouveau painter. No one argues with that. He took Art Nouveau and he adopted it with his own added signature motifs like these geometric patterns. And the other signature motifs, he had 3 that were his personal additional features on top of being an Art Nouveau style painter. He used gold. That is actual gold in the background because he was the son of a goldsmith. He learned how to put gold, layers of gold into his paint, or gold dust, whatever it was, types of real gold we're talking about, not just the color gold. So that's actual gold on the background, which makes his paintings into an icon. Icons in the Middle Ages had gold backgrounds. A sacred image is an icon, of course. Not talking about the computer meaning of the word. We're talking about the traditional use of the word icon. So he used the concept of gold backgrounds from medieval icons to make his paintings seem, more, impressive or even important. He was a very popular painter with the public, but the local officials didn't like him because he would do all kinds of sexual themes on murals in public buildings. They hired him to paint in Vienna all kinds of murals, right? And when he did them, he didn't worry about, what the censors might say. So I think 1 or 2 of his were removed, but certainly he was then banned from doing public murals for a while in Vienna because he was so controversial. So the last thing now is, what does this mean? Oh yeah, I didn't say the third motif. I kind of did. His signature motif is about human sexuality and or erotic relationships. Is this one? Yeah, it is, but it's lower key than most of his paintings, the ones that got him in trouble. This wasn't controversial. It might be suggestive to a degree. It's a couple that most historians believe, this is the last part of the meaning now, that Klimt would have observed in a park in Vienna on his way to his studio, somewhere in his neighborhood where he lived, having an illicit affair is what the rumor is, that he might even have known who they were. It might have been two office workers who were married to other people. We don't, the details are not definite, but there's some evidence that he knew who they were, and he knew they were having a tryst, whatever you want to call it, get together in a park, a public park, which is where they are. They're kneeling on the grass, perhaps behind some trees, thinking they can't be seen. In any case, he's recording their illicit. At least that's the main theory. There are other people who say, oh, just two models he hired to pose this and then made up that story later. We don't know for sure, but we do know that he's implying that they're having some kind of an illicit liaison here. And the obvious romantic or / erotic attraction is what makes this painting so famous and popular of these two people. Okay, formal analysis. Well, it's almost all warm colors, except some of the blue, looks like the actual grass, the layer of grass below where they're kneeling here. And some purple, but their bodies and the robes they're each wearing, or her dress and the robe, it might be a separate robe probably, or a bigger one that he's enveloping her with. All of that is, and the background, of course, being gold is almost entirely warm. And yet their skin tones are, I mean, even for a European couple here, are kind of pale, aren't they? Well, hers are. His aren't so much. So his skin tones might be somewhat warm, and hers are almost cool because they're really not normal color tones for anybody's skin. So you could say he's kind of juxtaposing the warm and the cool colors on the two figures to distinguish them, because they're so closely embraced that they almost become a single object. That's his intention, how they've meshed, their attraction to each other, their embracing and kissing has almost made them into one being. In a way, that's what, of course, some romantic poems say about love in general. So he's implying that, but he is differentiating them with warm color on the man's skin tones and cool on hers. Okay, is there bold outline? A little bit, I guess you could say, on the hands, mostly, I would say, not so much on the rest of the painting. And there is only overlapping. There's no other technique for space here. There's no foreshortening, diminishing size. The largest mass, it's the two of them together. They become one mass. And then the grass. The largest mass is them, and the second largest mass is the grass. And that's it. There are no other masses. Is it balanced? I think so, roughly. But because some people think of this, the grassy patch that he displays, and partly because it doesn't go all the way to the edge of the right end of the painting, and they think of this as empty, but he put real actual gold into the paint, and so I see that as having mass. If you look at it that way, I'd say it's roughly balanced with them in the middle, roughly, and yet there is some reason why it's okay or legitimate, if you see it that way, to say it's unbalanced somewhat or slightly towards the left, and or the bottom if you think of this as empty, but I wouldn't. Okay, and then we have the rhythm, obviously, of the flower patterns in the grass and on her dress, and the geometric patterns on his robe, I'll call it a robe or blanket, and of course their bodies, arms, hands, feet. And let's see, proportion and scale, again, no distortion here. Oh, here this texture is realistic, similar texture on their upper bodies, what you can see of them, but not on, I wouldn't say on the clothing. It's hard to tell what those are. Those blankets, is it geometric patterns just for the sake of it, or is there actual robes here, dresses, clothing? The flowers are implied textures that have, implied, but not really strong similarity. The only actual realistic similar textures and modeling both are on their faces, hands, and her shoulders and legs. Okay. Here's one that got him in trouble. It's a portrait of a woman who hired him to do. A lot of upper class women who had, you know, enough money to hire the most famous artist in Europe. Some would say certainly in Vienna anyway, or Austria at that time, because he got very successful and could charge very big fees. Some of them wanted him to paint them partially nude. Others just left it up to him. In any case, it was controversial enough to cause some, as I said, scandal with the public officials. But this is not just about human sexuality or erotic love or anything. Look at this. You see what that is? It's a skull popping out of a woman who's obviously pregnant, and she is apparently have already, or maybe these are just symbolizing the future children she might have, perhaps 3 daughters. I mean, you see obviously a blonde, a redhead, and a brunette, as though they came from her womb. That by itself would be moderately controversial, but the skull coming out of her belly like that and the nudity of her upper body caused this painting to get quite a bit of controversy when it was shown. It's not a must know, it's not on syllabus, so you don't need to know what it is. But if you want to see major controversy that caused, you have to go all the way back to there. I meant to put this in the forward part of the file, but it's not a must know. This is a portrait of, it's called Madonna, as in the mother of Jesus. Now, I was raised Catholic, so I know all this, why this would have caused such controversy when it first appeared in 1902 as a poster in Vienna. Then it was reproduced as postcards for museums around the world that were in more liberal cities, but ones in places like the Midwest, in smaller towns in the US, or even rural parts of Europe, found it too offensive. Because what we're saying is, the artist, I meant, sorry, was saying is, of course, there's this story of, you have to know this, the story that Madonna gave birth to Jesus without having had sex, according to the Bible. He's saying, no way. If it's not obvious, the whiplash curves here are formed by sperm. And then there's baby Jesus, who doesn't look like he wants to come out into this not so happy world that, of course, especially back in Roman times, in occupied Israel, right? We might not have wanted to come out if he had a choice. That's what he's saying. I mean, just the artist's own deliberately controversial statement here. This got him in trouble too with authorities. Okay, now we're switching to a very different artist, one who I will tell you right now has a very high likelihood of being on this must know, it's this slide, of being on the final because of his importance. And I think everyone's heard of him, and maybe they know a little bit about him or some false information about him. So I'm going to give you the actual facts about him. And that's the next must know you're looking at right now is at the Moulin Rouge is the title, 4 words. At the Moulin is Moulin, and Rouge, the last word, is Rouge. That actually is the name of a nightclub. Some of you know this. There's 2 movies, maybe it's 3 by now, with that title about Toulouse-Lautrec's paintings of that nightclub. It was so famous. It's where the can was invented. It's all part of the meaning. Should be taking these notes. This one I'm not cutting from the study list, because he made that nightclub famous, world famous, with his paintings and drawings. Posters, actually, paintings and drawings, all 3. He was equally talented as a graphic artist. So anybody who has a career in graphic arts, computer generated or otherwise, which most, what else is there but CGI now, in the graphic arts, you owe this man a debt of gratitude. And I'm not exaggerating. My nephew, I've told you, some of you, right? He's a very successful Disney graphic worker in Disney. He did the special effects, CGI, of course, for the fight scenes in the first 2 Iron Man movies. He went to community college at Santa Monica Community College, where he was living at the time. And he had an instructor who inspired all of his students, including my nephew, with these same kind of paintings and posters that I'm going to show you, because this is the way I'd like to have you remember, at least until the final, then you can forget it if you want, that Toulouse-Lautrec is considered by many historians to be the father of modern graphic art. Or you could just say graphic art. Graphic art didn't really exist in the Renaissance or the 18th century. Well, it sort of did with, the let's see, now we're talking about the wedding, right? That one, which we saw earlier. But that's not really the same thing. So I'll repeat that and I'll explain it as part of the meeting. So you should have it in your notes like this, that many historians consider Toulouse-Lautrec to be the father of what to say, modern graphic art, meaning mass-produced images, posters. Back then, that's what they had. They didn't have any other medium, which then established the concept of what graphic art does. Graphic art is different than painting, and we'll explain as we go. Okay, I didn't spell his name, I apologize. So the artist is a hyphenated last name. It's the city he lived in. He was born and raised in Toulouse, a big city in southern France. First part of his name, Toulouse hyphen last name, his actual last name, Lautrec, capital Lautrec. I already spelled the title at the Moulin Rouge, 1895. He did several paintings with that title. This one, I took these slides myself, is at the Art Institute of Chicago. Both of my parents, before they even met each other, they were students there. They studied this painting and had to reproduce, versions of it in their art studio, art painting classes. It's a painting, an oil painting, and it depicts behind the scenes at the world's most famous nightclub. The Moulin Rouge was a nightclub, which, by the way, literally translates to Red Windmill. It's still there. It's a very popular tourist attraction to this day in that part of Paris. And they still, I understand, I've never been there, but supposedly they still have actors doing can-cans and other dance and singing routines the same as they were when he was there. Now, Toulouse-Lautrec is this man here. Now, these are all facts. Some of you may know this, but there's some misinformation about him, that he was, quote, born a dwarf, unquote. No, that's not accurate at all. He had an accident when he was, I think it was 9. You could say, a young boy. It was around 9, maybe 10. He fell down 2 flights of stairs. I had that happen to me once. I'm lucky I walked away. Luckily, it didn't kill him, but it broke his legs, both his legs, in like 7 places or something, 6 or 7 different breaks. And his legs never grew after that. He had to have several operations, and it was painful to even walk a short distance. So he was 4'10" the rest of his life, even though the upper part of his body was fully normally formed. So in his case, his disability was due to a terrible accident in childhood, not a birth condition. Okay, that's an important, because a lot of even textbooks will say that born a dwarf. No, they got that wrong. It's well documented. He had an accident at about age 9. And his father was rich. He owned a huge estate with a mansion, and his son was running to greet his dad, who came home from he was working as a doctor. His father was a very popular doctor in that area of France. And he fell down the stairs, broke his legs in several places, and they never grew back normally. So he had stunted legs, if you want to put it that way, and a normal upper body. And he was 4'10". So there he is, right there. That's him.
Excuse me, are you talking about Toulouse-Lautrec?
I've been talking about him.
Okay, I missed some because I got a phone call.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
well,
just making sure.
Yeah, well, okay.
Got it. No, I had heard that story before.
Sure, that's who it is. There he is, right there. And of course, it's being recorded, so you'll have it on. Now, I'm showing you some close-ups. Let's do this. There he is.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, now he was with his cousin, who was 7'6" or something, well over 7 feet. Now, they made an odd couple when they walked in a room. You can imagine. They got a lot of attention. And he was never accepted as much as just sort of famous because of his unique artistic quality and his ability to illustrate the nightlife of Paris. He identified with the rejected classes. He said that in more ways than one. Even though he came from a wealthy family, he could have stayed home and been taken care of and inherited his father. His father disowned him because he hated his son's painting things like prostitutes, lesbians in love who asked him to paint their portrait as a wedding present. Yep, they had they had gay and lesbian weddings in Paris. They weren't legal, but they happened, and he would be asked to paint these. He was very much of a, today, it'd be like no big surprise, but he'd be certainly on the cutting edge even in modern society. But in the 1890s in France, that made him totally unacceptable to the establishment. His paintings were never allowed to be displayed in almost any gallery except one gallery, which is where they sold, because he did have a successful career. Unlike Van Gogh, he was able to make a living off his painting. He died at 40 or around 40 of cirrhosis of the liver, because there's all facts about him. It could be used on the final, and if it's on an essay question, which is that he was an alcoholic because of the pain in his legs, the rejection of his own family. Well, his mother never stopped. She kept writing to him, and occasionally would visit him in Paris, but she, didn't have the money. Obviously, the father did. So he was cut off by his father, disowned totally, and he had to make his own way. And he taught himself how to paint. Obviously, the man was a genius. He overcame all kinds of pain, but he couldn't overcome the stigma and the outcast role that he was forced into, or the pain in his legs, which never went away. So he drank very heavily, and he died of cirrhosis of the liver around 40. Happened to a lot of artists. So that's him and his cousin. But who are the other people? Well, let's go back to the full view, because if it's on the exam, you'll see the whole view. Well, we know who some of them are. The owner of the nightclub is here, with a slightly bluish tint to his face and the top hat. This is an English couple that came regularly to buy Toulouse-Lautrec's paintings. So he was even more popular, or as popular, let's say, in England as he was in France, with those who understood, that weren't, moralistic to the point where they didn't want to see a painting of anyone who wasn't the upper level of society. So he had plenty of you could say followers. That's not the word, of course, they would have used back then, who came to Paris, to this nightclub, to either buy paintings he'd already done or commission a painting from. So that's what this couple is. The husband is the one with this English couple, I should say, is the one where the husband has a black hat and the wife has this funny looking ribbon on top of hers. This is a French couple. He's an art critic, one of the few that praised Toulouse-Lautrec's work among establishment people in Paris. He understood the quality of his work. So that's a French art critic and the French art critic's wife. And then these are two singers who were rivals. There is a movie called Moulin Rouge. You can get 10 points extra credit. Don't waste your time watching the one with Kirsten Dunst, even though it's intended to be, somehow honoring Toulouse-Lautrec. It goes way off the mark. I mean, it has disco music in it. The one to watch is the Academy Award-winning movie, where the actor, some of you may have heard of it, Moulin Rouge, 1954, that far back, is probably the first serious movie in Hollywood, period, about the life of any famous artist. The next one would have been the one on Van Gogh 2 years later, which I've already told you is one of the best movies ever filmed about art, and that's called Lust for Life, about Van Gogh. But this movie called Moulin Rouge stars a man who was 6'4", walked on his knees the whole time, and won the Academy Award, and nearly lost the ability to walk, because he, for months in each scene, he had to walk on his knees with his back part of his leg tied to, you know what I'm saying? He literally almost disabled himself to play the part. It's an amazing movie. It's very accurate and it's kind of sad because his life was not easy. I've already said that, but it's a great movie, filmed on location in Paris. It's called Moulin Rouge. That's the title, the same as the one decades later that's not worth watching with Kirsten Dunst. So you could watch either one. I won't try to say you couldn't get credit if you want, but if you're going to choose between them, probably should watch the more accurate one and write 2 pages about what you learned about the artist's life and work, and you get 10 points. That's one of the ongoing extra credit options. Very few people have done that. Okay, these 2 women were rivals. They were John Avril, A-V-R-I, right, was her last name, if you want to write it correctly, but you can just write it the way it sounds, like Jean in English. French say Jean Avril. And Galou, G-A-L-O-U, was a stage name for the more aggressive of the two. I think you can see there's a rivalry here between them. They sometimes even fought with each other over who got to go out on stage first and things like that. So they had a rivalry going. Here's the part of this painting that gave me nightmares when I was a kid. Is this woman? Nobody knows. And the blue metallic face or skin, being painted here clearly is a deliberate effort by Toulouse-Lautrec to mark her as somehow separate from everybody else. We don't know. It might be a real person. It might be an imaginary figure that he is just making a comment on this whole group of people, even the owner who was wealthy, right? Whoops. We got to do this. Sorry. It's too much distraction here. Okay. Hopefully. There we go. Now let's get back to this. Let's wrap this up, because this is an important detail that no one knows for sure why he painted that woman with blue skin. Whether she's real or imaginary isn't the point. It's an indication of the outcast status of all even the owner of the nightclub was shunned in places of high repute, if you know what I'm saying. He wasn't welcome because he owned a place where the can was in many of the most high society sites in Paris, even though he was wealthy and a self-made, a successful businessman. And also because he hired these kinds of performers. Some of them were former prostitutes who he helped get off the streets. But the owner, he was a good friend of Toulouse-Lautrec. Obviously, we probably wouldn't know who he was if it wasn't for his Lautrec's friendship with the owner of the club. So this is a whole group of avant-garde people. That's a great French word, right? Whereas my aunt in Indiana would say avant-garde with an E on the end, right? Those who are on the far edge or cutting edge of society, who aren't accepted by the establishment. Everybody in that room fits that definition. And that's the stage out there. You see that? There's the audience, and the stage is in the background. So there's a performance about to happen. And this is behind the glass wall. It had a glass wall where the break area was for the owners, their guests, and their performers. And the invited honored guest, he was always given a special table, Toulouse-Lautrec himself. It's so obviously Art Nouveau, but if it's not obvious, I'll explain. You see whiplash curves on both of the chairs that are visible, of course, and on the upper bodies of both of these performers, especially I think that's Jean Avril. I'm pretty sure some people debate which one is which, but anyway, it's the two main singers. And so we'll say it's Jean Avril with a V. Her arms, I mean, that's obviously a set of whiplash curves there, and then down along her waist. So whiplash curves are everywhere. Broad areas of flat color. Well, that's exactly what that blue-faced woman has on her. I used to have nightmares about this when I was a little kid. I thought she was a ghost or something. And of course, you see that on the red. Well, actually, it's orange, I guess, but we'd call redhead from behind. Looking from behind, you see a broad area flat color on the woman with the red hair, right? And then on the railing. And the only thing here we don't see are the geometric plant motifs, but we do see geometric motifs in the way the lighting is depicted. And if you were to walk into that room, those lights had plant motifs. So it's even in that regard, the third feature of geometric plant motifs is visible, just not as obvious. Okay, formal analysis, it is brilliantly balanced. I mean, look at it carefully. That railing and the mystery blue-faced woman balance each other out very carefully, as does the group sitting at the table with Lautrec and his cousin right in the middle. Now, some people think because the two singers are here, that unbalances, but I don't see it that way. When you add the weight or mass of the rather heavy-set man there, the English husband, with, the wall and the railing behind them, I think it's roughly balanced both ways. Well, you see his reflection, you see in the glass too. I'd say it's roughly balanced. It's full of the rhythm of the obvious shapes we already covered, and of course the human bodies. It's got bold outline to some degree, more so on the one with the blue face. And I guess of the two singers, you see some bold outline on Jean Avril, and maybe the railing to some degree, but the modeling, it varies. There's definitely modeling, obviously, on the one with the blue face. And on the group at the table, but some have more modeling than others, of course. It does have realistic semi texture on the group in the middle, but not really. It's soft and diffused textures on the railing and on the glass wall behind them. And even on the clothing, it doesn't have realistic similar texture. It's dynamic. I don't, there's really almost nothing straight in it. Even although Lautrec is the closest thing, his upper body is pretty much straight. But even he and his cousin are leaning, slouching forward a little bit. All the other figures and all the other objects are dynamic. For space, you've got overlapping, foreshortening, and diminishing size. I wouldn't call this atmosphere. Well, you could call atmospheric perspective because it has a slightly bluish green, hazy look to the view through the glass wall into the auditorium. Does have some hint of that, so you could call that, but it doesn't have scientific perspective. He didn't use that very often. Okay, and proportion. Well, you know, if you could see all of his body, you would have to say because of his accident, he had altered proportion in a tragic way. But you don't see his bottom of his half of his body where his legs were deformed by that accident. So you would just have to say, no, on this view, there's no altered or abnormal proportions or scales between the figures or within each figure. Okay, and the largest mass is this group of people, I would say. Like they qualify as a single mass, and then maybe the railing and or the lady with the blue face. Okay, so I'm going to go to, that's another one.
Excuse me?
Chicago. Yes.
I always loved the colors of his paintings.
Yeah.
That didn't bother me, the one you just, it never bothered me. I just love the colors.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, when I've been back since when I took my daughter to see this painting. She loved it twice. Yeah, no, I'm talking about when I was 5 or 6, and I'd see this painting, and
Yeah.
anything strange like that, when you're a little kid. Anyway, let's talk about colors, though. That's a good point you're raising. You see them, the broad areas of flat color. Actually, thank you again for Tanya for bringing that up. I forgot that's the one other thing. Well, I already said it. I did about the Art Nouveau influence, especially the blue on that woman's forehead. Let's look at them in some of his 2 other works that are not must-know. So we'll go quickly so we can get to the rest of the must-knows and finish roughly on time. This is called At the Circus. I love this. This French clown's the outer edges of his legs, right, and arms. There's whiplash curve. Even it's a piece of plastic molded to the back of his head. Or French clowns have a strange attire. I've seen them. I've been to a circus in France. Yeah, so they still do this. And so he's, like a drunk or something, trying to make people laugh at his stumbling. And here's the ringmaster, literally. And there's your whiplash curve right there. The horse's hindquarters have a whiplash curve, and the ballerina, she's an actual performer that was friends with Toulouse-Lautrec, and he painted her quite often in different settings. She would perform on stage and also in a setting like a circus, sometimes in public places. So this is at the Art of Chicago, and it's also, I think it's around 1895 too. But the thing I want to make, the point I want to make, and I think it's still relevant enough to say, even though you've taken plenty of notes, you don't have to add any more about the meaning of the must-know of Toulouse-Lautrec. I think it's important enough for some of you, especially if you either are now already or ever plan to have a career in graphic arts, why you would owe a debt of gratitude to this person. Okay, this is a poster. He is definitely the father of the modern poster. One other person, Alphonse Mucha, his name was, out of Prague, is sometimes credited equally. But the difference with the Munkas is that they were advertisements for a particular beer, a Czech beer company, mostly the ones you may have seen. Some of you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, forget it. You don't need to know. But what you do need to, when you look at this, see is the elements of modern graphic art are all right here. First of all, the broad areas of flat color. That's an Art Nouveau concept, but he took it. So your comment is very, very apt, Tanya, about the colors. Because you see her hair. This is that English couple we saw earlier, right? At the Moulin Rouge, a must-know painting. This is not a painting. It's a mass-produced. These were all over the city of Paris, advertising a different nightclub than the Moulin Rouge, the Divan Japonais, which of course means Japanese in essence nightclub, and the address and the owner's name. That's all the information you need, and all that he would put on his posters. If you've ever seen in any history books, films, documentaries, whatever, posters before the late 1800s, before him, were full of words. They were mostly words with maybe, if like a recruiting poster for the Civil War during, when Lincoln called up all those volunteers to fight the Confederacy. They would have a cannon, maybe, or maybe two cannons and a flag, and then everything else was text, which people don't usually stop to read when they're walking down the street. So that's why you have to consider Lautrec as the father of the modern poster, if not of graphic art itself. He understood the concept. People don't take time to look at all the detailed writing. They'll look at an image, and the minimum information you want to convey should be kept to just a few words, which he was brilliant at. And then you take the broad areas of flat color, which draws the eyes of the viewer, the attention of any viewer quickly. And that may be an Art Nouveau concept, but he took it to a new level. Look at her whole dress here and her red hair and her husband's blonde beard. And then we have the Art Nouveau influence, which again is part of course, the period and the style that he didn't invent, but he made this even more full of whiplash curves, everything, the husband's cane, the chair, the wife sitting on, the musical instruments in the orchestra, and even the body of the singer. And oh, wait, there's an absolute misinformation in some video. I don't want to waste your time with it, which was trying to peg Toulouse-Lautrec as a sexist. What a complete crock of BS. It was just the opposite of that. Anyone who knows anything about his life and knows what kinds of people he spent time honoring at their request when he showed two lesbians after a wedding ceremony in their bed, embracing, happy, in love. He not only got that, he honored it, and they asked him to come. And so this, some people say, well, he's cutting the head of the singer off, so he must, be objectifying here. No, she is Genevieve, and she was moonlighting at a rival nightclub, and if her face was shown, she'd have been fired from her main gig. So she asked him not to show her face, or let alone her head. That's why he has the singer only from the neck down, or even the shoulders down. So there's a logical reason for that. But also it's a very important point that this doesn't need to emphasize an individual singer or performer. It needs to emphasize the audience enjoying drinks, and there's some kind of snack item here on the counter in a bag, who knows what it is, chips or something, whatever they had for snacks in France in the 1890s. And this was mass produced. These went all over. He invented whole new colors. So again, Tanya, that's a very good point you raised. Yeah, he invented new shades of colors. I'm not saying he invented orange and black and yellow, but look at the degree that for a poster, these colors, particularly hair and the beard on the couple, stand out as slightly more intense versions of orange or red hair and yellow or blonde hair and beard. He actually developed new colors chemically, that new shades or tones, I should say, not new colors, that he then had to show the chemists, the printers, the printers, how to make those colors, so they would actually reproduce exactly the same, of course, on thousands and thousands of posters. If you have one of these original posters, there are a few places I've seen them in private homes, wealthier homes over the years I've been teaching. They're worth a lot of money if they're an
Yes,
original.
they are.
Yeah, and they're beautiful. They really are.
Yeah, they are a fortune.
Yeah, and they draw you in, as this does. So he is the father of the modern poster. No one would argue with that, but I would also add the father of graphic art. Okay, let's move on now to very interesting artist. Some of you already know something about him. Let's see, did I decide to, I'm going to go ahead and show it to you, but because we're running down on time, how are we doing?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
I bought a print of the Kiss in fabric. I didn't realize that this company was making them. And so I bought a whole, a large print, and I'm going to make a coat and put it on the back of
That should
it.
be interesting. Well, if you take a photo of it and send it to me, it's worth 5 points extra credit.
Okay.
Like you sending a painting or something that people do.
Okay.
Okay, this is actually, I think we're going to have to end with this, and then I may have time to go back and add one that we had to skip. But this is so important. I definitely not cutting this. Eiffel, Eiffel. If you have never heard of anyone else in French art history, you should know who this man is, the inventor of the Eiffel Tower. So, of course, the title is the Eiffel Tower. Not cutting this in the study list, very high possibility of being on the final. And the date is 1889. So here are the facts. I'll keep it to just the highlights. First of all, It was built for the 1889 World's Fair, Paris World's Fair. They've had a dozen World's Fairs in Paris, I think more than any other city in the world. And this fair was to celebrate. Why did they have one that year? To celebrate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution, exactly 100 years later. And Eiffel was hired in a contest. He won. You could just say he won a contest with all the other famous architects and engineers. See, he was both, just like Julia Morgan. If you came on my walking tour, you heard me make that statement. This is not very common for architects, certainly in America, to be equally trained as engineers. They usually have to hire an engineer. He was both. And there's a great movie called Eiffel. I just watched it last night, and I wasn't even thinking about that. I just happened to see it on Amazon. It's, I don't think it's streaming. In other words, it's just called Eiffel, and it's a very, very high quality French cast. I recognize the actors, but I love French movies. Yes, it's got subtitles. If you don't like the movie subtitles, you probably won't watch it, but it's beautifully filmed on location about how he won that contest, who he was. And yes, there's a love story. Hey, it's a French movie. You got to have some, romance in it. Who knows if that part's true, but all the rest of it is factual. This was a very controversial project. It almost never happened. And once, this is all part of the meaning now, this was controversial. Just say a lot of people in Paris didn't want it to be built. He thought it was ugly, or that it would ruin the skyline. Never mind that it's the most famous image of any image of France. Obviously, it's become the symbol of the whole country, and people love it, both in France and all around the world. Okay, but he had to fight very diligently for years. I think it was like 2 or just say for a long time. It took him a long time to get approval and to win that contest, so that he got the commission to design the most important structure at the 1889 fair, which then, when the fair ended, the people that didn't like it tried to get rid of it. They were threatening to tear it down. So the city of Paris is all part of the meaning. It's rather remarkable. Took a vote, just like we do when we have propositions and things. They took a vote, and barely 51%, just over half of the population, or of the voters anyway, in Paris, chose to keep it. Just think how history would be different. Well, you wouldn't even know about it, right? Unless you were a fan of the history of a World's Fair. Most people don't even know what World's Fairs are, but everyone knows what the Eiffel Tower is. It is the tallest structure in France.
I do.
Was the tallest structure, that was the tallest structure on Earth for almost 40 years. What replaced it, I think some of you know, actually over 40 years, what am I saying, was not the Empire State Building. It was the Chrysler Building in New York City. And then the Empire State Building was slightly taller than that. Those both were built in the early 1930s. So over 40 years, this structure, in other words, held the title as the world's tallest human or man-made structure. It's just under 1,000 feet. And I've had students go, well, how come he didn't go to it? Because it's not America. They use meters. So 300 meters is the height. And that comes out to 980, I think it's like 988 feet. So just say slightly under 1,000 feet. But its round number is the meters, 300 meters, which is almost the whole world except us uses meters, right? The metric system, we don't, and I think 1 or 2 other countries like Australia. So he made it a 300-meter tall structure, meaning just under 1,000 feet, way taller than any other human structure had ever been. And it became finally, within a short time after the fair closed and that vote to keep it, within a year or two, it became beloved. It really is. It's a pretty remarkable structure itself, even if you just look at it from below. But I climbed up the stairs. I couldn't do that now. When I first trip to Paris, take the elevator and you'll get to, let's see, I think I have a closer view. No, I don't. Yeah, we'll just go up. Yeah, we'll do this. I think you would see that it has an elegance that is Art Nouveau. These are whiplash curves right here on the footings, is what they're called, the footings, or the bases of the building. It's an engineering triumph because it's on soft riverbank soil, and people said it's going to collapse, it'll sink, it'll tilt, it might eventually, fall over. Nope. He knew what he was doing. He figured out a system for the foundation that is brilliant. It's been used on tall, heavy buildings ever since. Yeah, he was a genius. Gustav Eiffel is how they would say, or Eiffel as we say it. Anyway, you got the Art Nouveau whiplash curves here everywhere. Geometric patterns of flowers, they're all up and down in metal. And the broad area flat color, the whole building. The whole building is one flat kind of rusty gray, rusty reddish brown color, sorry. And of course that makes it warm. So let's do the formal analysis. Completely balanced left to right. But if you want to argue that it depends on where you draw the line, top to bottom, this would be the dividing line. Then it's got an equal area covered or weight mass of the tower above the second level. These are restaurants, right, and gift shops. There are 3 levels here, right, that you can get off the elevator and walk out on a platform and see a view you'll never see anywhere else of the most beautiful big city in the world from the best possible vantage point, which is why he built it where he did. And there were parts of Paris where, the bottom levels you wouldn't have a view because there are buildings, a few hundred feet tall, like churches and things that were already there. So he put it where there was nothing around, where the views are unobstructed. Of course, it's got the rhythm of those geometric patterns and whiplash curves and the curve of the building itself. It is almost entirely dynamic, except for the 3 platforms, the 3 levels, if you want to say. But actually, he called them platforms because those have flat bottom or floors on them, of course, and ceilings. So those are stable. Everything else is dynamic. Already mentioned it's a warm color. There's no modeling, just shadows from the sun that create different shadows or shading. There's no technique for modeling. For space, I already mentioned, but I'll repeat that. It is a real object which reaches a height of over 980 feet. I think it's just say nearly 1,000 feet. You can just keep it simple. It's a single mass. I don't think you can break it down into separate pieces. There's no distortion of proportion right here or any particular abnormal scale between it and anything else. It was just the tallest structure in the world. By the way, this is one of their oldest hospitals. That's where Napoleon's body is buried. And it was the tallest building on that side of the river when this was built. And it's about a nearly 200-foot tall dome. And it's dwarfed by of course, it's a ways away, but it's not even a quarter the height of this tower. Okay, and then let's see, am I forgetting anything? Oh, textures, the real smooth texture of metal and glass. That's the only 2 textures. There's no simulated texture. In line, of course, it's all visual line with the edges, right? The framework, if you will, of the building itself. And of course, there's no carved or drawn line or painted line of any other kind here. And am I forgetting anything? Balance, mass, weight. I think we covered it all. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share and stick around if you have questions. I think we just covered.
When I was 5,
yeah.
When I was 5, I had my birthday there.
Oh, that's pretty exciting. Yeah. Yeah.
Just a little cake from me and my father.
And what part of the building were you at? The first
One of those restaurants there.
Yeah, there's several. Yeah, I think it's 3 now. Well, actually, the top level, it's not big enough for a restaurant.
It wasn't the top. It was like in the middle.
Yeah, that
wasn't the top. Yeah.
One. I'll bet it's booked ahead for weeks.
Well, I don't know how he did. My dad obviously did something, booked something, but I just was so thrilled.
Well, again, if anyone has photos of something they've been to this semester, an architecture site, you can have 10 points if you give me 4 photos. But if you have any images that, or like you just said about did you say you had
to call my father and see if he has some photos? He does have some photos. I have to call him and ask him if he'll make some copies.
If you make a PDF and you label it what it is, and you push with your name and all that, I'm willing to give 5 points if it's clear that it's related, which it is, obviously, to the course what we're covering. All right. Anybody have any other questions? I should have all the grades for the second midterm probably in your inboxes by late sometime. Who knows how late? Tuesday, so Wednesday. You should be able to see your grades by Wednesday night. Yes.
In the summer, they always have the most interesting music people playing there around the Eiffel Tower.
And then
it's
they
really
do light
music.
They do light shows, laser, another type of light show. Yeah, and
It's
every
a special place.
Yeah, every time there's a national holiday, they light it up in different colors that relate to that, and also for foreign countries and ceremonies, so it's
Mhm.
it's one of the 10 most beloved sites on earth, along with the Taj Mahal and the
Mhm.
Statue of
That's
Liberty,
right.
places like that, for good reason.
And oh, what a gift they gave us.
Yes, right. And that guy was the engineer, Eiffel. It's in the movie. It
Mhm.
starts with him talking
Yeah.
about the American people. I recommend that movie. It was just fascinating. It's about an hour and 50 minutes, and it goes
Mhm.
by very quickly. It's just the title is the man's name, his last name, Eiffel. It just came out, and it's filmed on location all over France because he was from southern France and then moved to Paris.
Mhm.
And his influence on engineering as well as architecture is huge to this day. Yeah, he was the engineer that actually put together the statue. He didn't design it. That was a different a sculptor, but they worked together. And then he was both the architect and engineer on the Eiffel Tower. So if you want to see that, it's a movie called Eiffel, and then write 2 pages for what you
Mhm.
learned. That's worth 10 points extra credit. I'll send an email. I said this, some people joined a little late. Very briefly, I heard from 4 or 5 people that said somehow they missed, they arrived 20 minutes late and they didn't think to go inside the first building, or they would have seen us in the group, me and the rest of the walking tour group. But I'm willing to do a different version, similar but not quite as extensive, of that. If I can get at least 6 people, it's not worth it for much less. And I'll send an email about that. And we'll have to pick, it'll have to be a weekend. And then of course it's, you can make a trip out, a day trip or whatever out of it, and lunch or whatever in Berkeley, but it would need to be probably the same area of Berkeley with most of the same buildings, just not all of the same interiors. If there's enough people, I'll do that one of the next 2 Sundays. Most likely it would have to be after Thanksgiving. All right, that's it. I think we covered everything we're supposed to, but don't forget, on Wednesday, you want to be here for the whole time and take good notes, because 2 of the slides I'm going to show you on early modern architecture. It's my area of expertise. Obviously, I've written several books on that subject. Architects like the ones we saw in Berkeley on the Sunday walking tour that are just very ahead of their time. The first green architects, first female independent architect in American history, all of those things. Frank Lloyd Wright. We're covering all of that. So you want to be here for the whole lecture and take good notes on what. All right. See you guys Wednesday. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.